Alright, teacher Mr. Loria's online class, narrative life of Frederick Douglass, chapter 6, we'll call it Pathway. This is like my fourth time trying to do this lecture. It's a tough one. We're going to start with a quote. Right? The quote is, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery, no one else will free your mind." So take 4, why am I being so picky with this chapter? I want to do it right, and what better place to do it than in this beautiful park here. Got the Golden Arches, got some Starbucks, right? What else is an American meat? Seriously, I'm happy right now, I seem so. No, but I mean, alright, I want this to be right. This is a very important chapter. Let's also remember, why do we study stories, according to Mr. Loria's theory, right? I think we study books to learn about life through stories, right? To learn about life through stories. So when we talk about chapter 6, Pathway, one of my favorite chapters I've ever read, we are going to talk about the meaning of it and as it relates to life. We're going to remember, too, that good stories, good narratives have multiple layers of meaning. What do I mean by this? I don't use stupid English major words. Fuck that. I was an English major. I don't draw plot diagrams, but I will point out that a good story has different layers to it. Read between lines, right? Like On the Road is a great story, great little narrative. On the one level, it's a sex, drugs, rock and roll road trip, right? Story, but there's a deeper meaning below that. It's there if you notice it. It's there, right? Narrative life of Frederick Douglass. I've mentioned this before. There were tons of books written about slavery, right? Why this one? Why is this still important? I think that in chapter 6 he exposes one of the deepest lessons in this tale. So we're going to talk more about what's right underneath the main plot, really. Start out, right? First 2 paragraphs talk about Mrs. Old and how her face is very, like, he's still struck by this. She's happy. She's heavenly smiles, her voice of tranquil music, right? But alas, next paragraph, he's like, power is already in her hands, commence its infernal work. Notice the words he uses: heavenly, angelic, infernal. Think of Dante's Inferno, right? He's making a point here. He'll make it several. He'll develop this thesis later, which is why I'm going to brush over it now. That slavery is detrimental to whites, also to blacks, right? That for a white, it's like a moral detriment for this to be happening. So it's one of the points he articulates. Now let's get to the main lesson here. This might be my favorite chapter that I've read, or this favorite paragraph, right? And ultimately, Douglass is searching. He's very interested in power structure. Like, how is it that all these black people follow all these white people? He wonders about that as a boy, and he's thought of a couple things already. All right, they control food, they separate families. They use violence, they use sex, they use religion. He hasn't really he's holding back on that, right? He's like, but how did they get us to obey them so much? And those things that he's noticed and he's seen aren't the main reason. And here he discovers the main reason. So what happens in the plot, right? He learns the ABCs, right? After I'd learned this, she assisted in learning me to spell words of 3 or 4 letters. In school, they call these CVC words: consonant, vowel, consonant, like cat, C-A-T, right? So basic stuff. He's got his ABCs. He's got some cat, dog, ball kind of stuff. At this point, Mr. Old finds out, and he forbids this to go on. So try to picture this in your head. You've got Frederick Douglass, about 7 or 8. You've got Mrs. Old, and in walks Mr. Old, and he says, right, and I'm going to read these words because it's from the book. I feel uncomfortable saying these words, but, right, he comes in, he finds out, he's like, oh, absolutely not, right? If you give a nigger an inch, he'll take a needle. A nigger should know nothing but to obey his master, to do what he is told. Learning would spoil the best nigger in the world. Now, said he, if you teach that nigger, speaking of myself, right? how to read, there'd be no keeping him, would forever unfit him to be a slave. He would at once become unmanageable and of no value to his master. And as to himself, it could do him no good but a great deal of harm. It would make him discontented and unhappy. And Douglas hears this and he thinks about it. Right? He says, these words sank deep in my heart, and they stirred up this mysterious new train of thought. It was a new and special revelation. I mean, that's another religious word. Like, this is like the sky is open. He's like, I get it, right? I now understood what had been a most perplexing difficulty, to wit, the white man's power to enslave the black man, right? Think about why Mr. Old tells him he can't learn, right? Why? Oh, you're going to be unhappy. You're going to be of no value to your master, right? You're going to be unmanageable. You're going to be like, we can't control you. And Douglas thinks about that. And he's like, okay. So I want to be my own master, right? I need to learn. I need this intellectual emancipation. Like that is the key. There's a quote later, maybe it's previous. He says this one master was, quote, the best master I ever had until I was my own master, right? And that's an interesting point, right? We're talking about liberating your mind. We're talking about intellectual emancipation, like thinking for yourself, right? He understood the pathway from slavery to freedom, right? He gets it. That's the white man's power to enslave. But he doesn't let me think. He doesn't let me think by myself. That's it. I got it, right? Think about, take a moment too to appreciate how lucky you are, we are. Why is this book written in the 1800s? By a black slave? Why is that still relevant to us right now in the 2000s, whatevers, right? Well, physical emancipation, keep in mind, and you can read about this, check my credibility here, but there are now statistically more human slaves than even at the peak of, African slavery with the European countries. There are more slaves today in terms of pure numbers than there were during that time, right? And I've worked with kids in different countries who were living on the streets and being used as like sex slaves and physical slaves. I mean, this still exists. It's not easy when you live in an orphanage with these kids and one runs away and you find them and you bring them back. Like, why'd you run? To find my mom, right? You're like, Jesus. Right? Meanwhile, those bastards didn't give me my double espresso. Stirred, whatever, right? So, physical emancipation is something that we sometimes take for granted. We're lucky. And intellectual emancipation is a little bit more complicated. It's a little bit more complicated. Right? This is the part that I like to say this to students, but you gotta trust me now. You are probably a mental slave. You're certainly born a mental slave. Sorry, deal with it. Right? You are a mental slave. Like, if you do not think for yourself, if you don't utilize the tools around you to the best of your ability, you're a mental slave. You've let others incarcerate your mind. Right? It reminds me, actually, like in every prison, even with all these state budget cuts and stuff, cable television's always standard. It's included. It's never touched. Some people are like, oh, it's a luxury. You read about it, people that run these prisons are like, no, it's not. It's our best means of behavior control. Given TV, it's like being stoned, right? So, are you free? Do you use these tools around you to the best of your ability? Like, if Douglas could see all the little things we have to learn, right? Where's my other phone? Shit, right? What would he say? What would he say to you, to me, to us? Right? I set out with high hope and a fixed purpose at whatever the cost of trouble to learn how to read. Right? High hope, fixed purpose. I'm hopeful and I'm going to get there, right? At whatever the cost of trouble. Let's keep in mind that the cost of trouble at that time was death. Okay, if you were a black slave and you were found learning how to read or reading, you were killed, right? Teaching other slaves to read, you're going to be killed. Right now we have truancy laws where, in the United States, at least, if you're under the age of 16, you have to go to school, right? Back then it was the opposite. They were like, no, right? It's illegal to read. So Douglas, when he says, at whatever the cost of trouble, he's talking about even if they kill me, I'm still going to learn how to read. So the example that he sets here, the importance of this message, one that we often take for granted, right? Books are boring, but there's a lot to be said here. Douglas could see you. Where would he think you were on the pathway from slavery to freedom? The pathway from slavery to freedom. And, learning is what blocks you from getting there, right? Knowledge is power. You've heard that a million times, but it is true in a certain way. So, pathway from slavery to freedom. Frederick Douglass, chapter 6. Again, any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts on life, email me, teacher Mr. Loria, and we'll take it from there. But hope you enjoyed it, that this lecture matters a lot. This chapter matters a lot. So please read it, please enjoy it. It means something. All right.